Hello and welcome to DevSecCon London, an instance of the global DevSecCon group. And I'd like to welcome you all on this rainy London evening. Thank you very much for making the journey across the distances of London. I'm Andy from Control Plane, a cloud native security engineering, and I have the great pleasure to introduce two wonderful speakers this evening. We have Marcel Lupo, who will speak to us about passwordless authentication between GitHub and Azure, different workload identity and token exchange mechanisms in there, and Joshua Locke, who will describe Salsa, the supply chain security framework, more than just a garnish for your pipelines. So this evening, of course, as with all DevSecCon events, we have a Discord up. It is the best place to interact, not only with speakers here, but also on the live stream and the community around the world. Once the session's over, you'll be able to rewatch it, of course. Everything goes up on the website. And DevSecCon is brought to you by our venerable sponsors, Sneak, who are somewhere around us, everywhere, permeating the ether. And that is it from me. Without further ado, I welcome Marcel Lupo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi there and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us this evening on this lovely summer's day, I would say. But anyway, my name is Marcel Lupo and I'm a DevOps and Solutions Architect. I currently work for a company called Avanade, which is a consultancy, mainly based around Microsoft technologies. And I'm also a Microsoft MVP and HashiCorp ambassador. And some of my details are on the screen here, like you can connect with me on LinkedIn or X, as I call it now, or GitHub. I also blog on dev.to, but my talk today is basically more around integration between GitHub, or specifically GitHub Actions or GitHub Workflows, and Azure. So I'm just curious, in the room here today, who uses Azure DevOps for automation in their pipelines, or for pipelines or workflows, or GitHub? Okay, that's quite good. A lot of GitHub. What about anything else? Maybe Octopus or Jenkins or anything like that? Okay, alrighty. So that's quite good. I mean, this passwordless authentication using OpenID Connect has been in GitHub for a bit now, for a little while. And it's very recently come out in Azure DevOps, where you can federate your kind of almost connection between the two systems to basically run your automation and workflow. So that's what I'm going to talk about today and show today. Out of curiosity, for you who use Azure DevOps or GitHub or Jenkins, have you ever had a time where you run your workflows or your automation, and then all of a sudden it just stops working and you don't really know what happened or why, but then realize after a lot of head banging against the wall that your service connection or the identity that you use to run your pipelines or workflows is using a password or a certificate, and that has expired? Have any of you come across a situation like that, where you kind of like go and you don't think about that, right? Because a minimum, just out of curiosity, do you use Azure? Do you run your workflows or AWS or? Okay, so it depends on the identity provider as well, I guess. But the identity provider we're going to talk about today is mainly Azure or the Entra identity. So first of all, let me talk about what is OpenID Connect. So it's basically authentication protocol that provides a layer on top of OAuth 2 that authorizes the protocol. It's a token-based authentication type that enables applications to verify their identity of the users to obtain a profile of information in a standardized manner. It also allows for things like single sign-on, one set of credentials. It's basically passwordless. So each time you do an authentication, it's a token that gets generated on the fly. So what are the benefits of it using OpenID Connect with Azure? So it offers single sign-on, which simplifies the user experience and reduces the workload of remembering usernames and passwords and things like that. And it also integrates quite easily with providers such as GitHub and Azure. Like I said, very recently, they introduced that into Azure DevOps, that identity that you can kind of almost federate between the two systems. And it basically is a standardized protocol for authentication. It's quite scalable, and the core functionality is basically to just secure the authentication between the two systems, between the two ecosystems. So just to, that's just a very brief overview of OpenID Connect, but I want to kind of show you how that all works. So I've got a little demo just to basically show you. So in my GitHub organization, I've got a little project here, and I've got a workflow that will just basically log into Azure. Let me just quickly go to my workflows. Quite quickly go in here. So I've got a very basic workflow that will just pretty much log into Azure and then show me my account details and show me all the resource groups that I've got available in Azure. But you'll see that when I log into Azure, I need to have a client ID and a tenant and a subscription, but I don't have any password. Now, in the past, before OpenID Connect, you would need to set up a app registration or a identity in Azure, which is password based. And then you would need to come into GitHub. You would need to set up that username, well, application ID, your tenant, your subscription, and the secret as secrets in that project. And then you would be able to run your pipelines to execute things against Azure, like authenticating into Azure and then maybe building a infrastructure, for example, or deploying an application. You need some sort of access and authentication into the platform. And that used to always be using an identity, using a password. And a lot of people would set that up one time, but the minimum time that you can have is about a year or 2 years. And then you kind of forget about it. And then one day your application deployments just fail and you don't know why, and it ends up being the password is expired. So by setting up federated credentials, you'll never have that problem because every single authentication is unique with a unique token. So what I'm going to do right here, just to show you real quick, is I'm going to set up a app registration within Microsoft Entra ID. And just to show you some ones that I have here already. So for example, this is an application. Let me just quickly turn my where was it now? Sorry, just gonna turn off my AZ mask. So you'll see here I've got my application ID. And if I go to the certificates and secrets, you'll see here I've got these different tabs. So I can either authenticate using this identity using a certificate, using a client secret, and this is only valid for a certain amount of time. And here is where we've got the federation now. That's the new thing, that you can federate this credential against other platforms. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set up a new application ID. I've actually got a little script here that will set it up for me. So I'm just going to log into Azure, and then I'll just run that first. Run that. Connection. That will just log me into Azure. I just need to authenticate in quickly. Just give me 1 moment. Should let me in. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say what subscription I want, and I'm going to provision this this identity against my subscription as a contributor. Now you can obviously set your identity's permissions against a resource group, or you don't have to do it at a subscription layer, but you can also have different sorts of permissions for this identity. For me, I'm just going to keep it simple. The identities name is going to be GitHub and Azure Actions OpenID Connect. And I'll talk about the repo name and the branch name here in just a moment, but I'm just going to set these variables here real quick and then create that identity. I'm just going to quickly go and run that section of code. The next bit of code here is going to basically set up that federation, and we'll take a closer look at that once that's set up. And then I'm just going to set that RBAC permission against my subscription. I'm just going to run that bit there. That should only take a few seconds. And that's done. So now if we have a look at the identities that I have for my app registrations or service principals or whatever you want to call them, you'll see here that I've got a new one here. And under my certificates and secrets, you'll see I've got no certificates. I've got no client secrets, but I've got my federated credentials. Now, my federated credentials is basically linked to my GitHub repository. And basically, if I just go into that, just to show you real quick, there is my token issuer is this URL, and that would be my GitHub organization, my repository, and the branch. What this means is when I run a workflow or a pipeline or an automation pipeline from my master branch from this repo, it will then initiate that token exchange and get authenticate into Azure using the permission of this principal. And I can have different ways of, or almost like different mechanisms of allowing that token to be issued. I can either do it based on a branch name or an environment name, whether it's a pull request or a tag, a version of my code that I'm trying to do something with. So it's quite cool that I can kind of almost scope it in that way, so that, say, for example, you don't want people running pipelines from different branches or something like that. You can kind of control that through this federation. I believe in Azure DevOps, it's just linked to the project. So I don't think there's that sort of entity type filtering almost that you can do based on your token. Just to show you real quick, this is my identity's name, GitHub Azure Actions OpenID Connect. And then if I look at my subscription, I'll just quickly go and look here at my permissions on this subscription. You'll see here that I have got my identity or application here as a contributor on this subscription. So with that set up, I'll just quickly jump back into GitHub. Now I can basically use that identity to log into Azure using my workflows and do stuff. And because there's a few people here that uses GitHub, I'm probably sure you know how your workflows and GitHub Actions and those things work. So I'm using a GitHub action here called Azure CLI login. And you'll see here that I need that client ID, I need the tenant ID and the subscription ID to basically use this to log into Azure. Now, you'll see there's no secret, as in a password for my identity. It's just asking for the identity, the tenant, and the subscription. So I'm just going to quickly jump back to Azure and just grab this identity's application ID. So if I just quickly jump back to Entra and go to app registrations, it's going to grab my application ID. And if you see here in my workflow, it's called Azure Client ID. I'm just going to go into my settings. Going to go and to my actions. So I've already populated my subscription ID and my tenant ID. So I'm just going to add the Azure. Just going to put that in here. Azure client. Oops, there we go, ID. Pop that in there. So you see, I don't have any password for that identity. It's just the identity, and I've got that federation already set up now between this repository and Azure using my master branch or any pull requests or anything like that. Now, the thing that I want to run, and I can now basically run anything in my pipeline. I can, because it's a contributor, I can create resources or I can deploy an application or anything like that. But in my case, just for the use case here, just to demo it, I'm just going to basically log in to Azure using that identity, and then I'm just going to list my resource groups or the resources that I have in that subscription, in that tenant. So if I just quickly go here, and if I run my workflow, and let's see when that starts running here. That's now basically, because it's coming from my master branch, this pipeline, it will use that identity, and the identity issuer will issue a token for that identity, a unique token for this run of this basically pipeline or this workflow. So you'll see in there that it's logging into Azure. And if I had something like a different branch, for example, dev or something like that, it wouldn't run. So you can see that it lists, it logged in, and then it lists all my accounts and resource groups basically that I have in Azure. And what's really nice about this now is that identity can almost like live there forever. There's no password that's going to expire. It's completely passwordless. It's a little bit of just setting up that identity and then enabling the federation using OpenID Connect. And like I said, this wasn't in Azure DevOps for a while. This very recently came out in Azure DevOps, but it's been in GitHub for a while. So I'm really happy that it's gone out there. I'm not sure about other providers if they have sort of federation, but I mean, this is pretty good for me. I mean, if you're using Azure to authenticate. That basically concludes my demo, really. And is there any questions or anything that you wanted to know about? Is that yeah? Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. What is the identity provider? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is very specific, right? Because you have to tell it your repository and everything. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 No, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's good. It's good to know that GitLab has got that um, federation as well. That's really good. Is there? Yeah, sure. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean oh yes, yeah, yeah. Sorry. So, so the question is, does this work on self-hosted runners? Oh, I see. Um, so the question is, can you have a filter so that's basically um, uh, as on top of the conditions here, um, basically these conditions here about the the entity type, can you also specify whether it can only run based on a self-hosted runner or not? The answer is yes, you can. The short answer. Yes, you can, but not here. So you can specify conditions on the action itself using tagging. So you can say, this pipeline can only run if my self-host or if my runner, as whether it's self-hosted or public, or if it's got, you can put tags on your runners. So you can actually trigger pipelines based on tags and things like that, but not for issuing a token. That's more of a control mechanism inside of GitHub rather than inside of Entra. But as of in terms of allowing the authentication through the token provider, you will have to use an entity type of either environment, branch, pull request, or tag. So those are the only options at this time. And I mean, you can, for example, you can add additional ones. So say for example, for my registration here, I've only got two, which I've done through code. So I've got based on my pull request, and I've got based on my master branch. But if I wanted to add more, I can add another one here. So let me add one. So you select the scenario. I'm going to use this for GitHub Actions. I can then give it my organization, which is PWD 9000 ML. My repo could be, I don't know, whatever my repo is called, call it repo 1. And then here I can now select my branch, which I have, my pull request, which I have as well. But say I had an environment, which was called dev, for example. I can then create this almost federation that says any pipelines that's running from a dev environment within GitHub will then issue this token. You can stack things, or you can just have very specific federations. But yeah, based on whether it's a self-hosted runner or a public runner or tags of that, you can control that in GitHub. Unfortunately, not in the token provider. All right. Any other questions? Is that all? Okay. Well, I mean, that would basically conclude my talk, and thank you very much for your time. And next up is quite an interesting talk with Joshua. So thank you very much. Thanks for your time, and thanks for coming.